In the 1580s, the English attempted to create a colony in the United States at a place called Roanoke. After its mysterious disappearance and vanishment from history, nearly 30 years later, in the year 1607, will be another attempt by the English at a place called Jamestown, and this will become the first permanent settlement by the English in North America. The English settlement of Jamestown is going to be created under the Virginia Company of London, a private company granted a charter by King James I of England, the same king through whom the King James Bible is going to be constructed under. And they are given the commands to hopefully find treasures, secure new lands against the Spanish there in Florida, possibly spread the teachings of the Church of England to local native tribes, and whatever profits and financial gains this company can acquire. That is their original intent of doing this voyage. It is going to take over 4 months before they arrive in Virginia. Most of these men are noblemen and well-to-do off people from London. They are not marksmen. They are not craftsmen. They have never done any much of real survival skills out in the wilderness. They are anticipating to arrive in Virginia, named after Queen Elizabeth of England, to simply find gold, find treasures, and return back to England. It is going to be swampy, marshy, mosquito-infested, and it is going to be a hard time to survive without clean water and resources to build and live in this new world, and pretty quickly, several dozen men are going to die off. The original 3 ships are usually forgotten in this part of history. The Godspeed, Discovery, and Susan Constant send the original English settlers on this voyage. One of the men on that voyage is Captain John Smith. He is a mercenary and a military soldier who has served in many battles in Eastern Europe under different kingdoms until this point. And a lot of his story that is highlighted in the Disney Pocahontas film are not always 100% accurate. He is 28 years old at the time of arriving in Virginia, while Pocahontas herself is only a young teenager, 11 to 12 years old. They did meet, did interact, but there is no such relationship of romance between the two. There is a possible legend, according to John Smith's diary, that Pocahontas, as a princess, tried to save him from being executed by the chief Powhatan of the native tribes in Virginia, but that is also indicated in multiple other accounts of John Smith's diaries back in Turkey and in Russia of princesses who have saved him from near disaster. Eventually, he years of exploring the eastern coastline up and down the Chesapeake Bay and creating what is nowadays called New England. He will return to England and spend the rest of his life there. But in 1607, they are going to arrive in a swampy, marshy area along the James River in the Chesapeake Bay and call it Jamestown. The early indigenous tribes are formed there are the Powhatan Indians. They have a confederacy of multiple villages and settlements, all ruled and led under one chief. When John Smith and them arrive, they are going to go through the bay, up the very first James River, and he will continue to explore the Rappahannock, the York, and Potomac rivers following it. That under his map that John Smith puts together, he indicates Chief Powhatan in the upper left corner, and you have there of Jamestown right on the shores, named after, again, King James of England. If you turn the map itself, it is pretty impressive of what John Smith was able to do as a cartographer and how accurate it was compared to today's landscape. His maps indicate various villages and settlements of these native tribes that archaeologists today can go back and rediscover while using it on this entire voyage, a very tiny little boat going up and down over 3,000 miles. Various other cartographers over the 1600s would do likewise of indicating this new world, ultimately trying to find a northwest passageway to reach Asia. The Powhatan Indians at this time in the region are part of the Algonquin people, headed under Chief Powhatan, and whose daughter Pocahontas is therefore a princess within the community. Living in wigwams and longhouses, many of these indigenous people will quickly pass away in the coming decades. There will be wars and conflicts with the settlers at Jamestown. Pocahontas herself is going to get caught up in it and actually be captured by the English and spend 1 year in captivity. During that time, she is going to be witnessed to by the local English Anglican priest. She is going to adopt Christianity, the first Native American in the New World to do so. In North America, she will become baptized, change her name to Rebecca, and not John Smith, but another Englishman, John Rolfe, she will marry. Later on in time, she will actually move to England. They will have a son, and at the age of about 21 to 22 years old, Pocahontas herself will pass away and die in England, where her body rests to this day in a cemetery outside of London. She was very well in England, as being viewed as an exotic princess from the New World. She would dress up in English attire and be accepted to courts and ball gown events. Mr. John Rolfe himself would eventually return to the Jamestown colony and continue his plantations and remarry once there. And at that same time, and as the years go on, many of the local tribes of people are either going to leave the region, move inland, or as well pass away, primarily through disease and coming in contact with Europeans. Jamestown itself as a settlement today is on an island in the James River, a marshy wetlands region that is slowly rising with its sea levels and making it difficult to excavate the site. When the original English settlers came, they would build a fort for its defenses using basic tools and materials that they had available to them, that if you don't have metal nails, you have to use wooden pegs. And in the process, there was the fear that militarily they could be invaded by the Spanish. There is a Jamestown work site today that recreates some of the original buildings, as well as some of the original ones like the church still stand to this day. The Spanish themselves would never invade Jamestown up the river, but eventually there are some maps that indicate by the Spanish that the English settlement was there. In those first few years, the English settlers did not find the wealth and treasures that they were seeking as a business profit, and therefore they needed some kind of source of income to sell back to Europe. And instead of relying on their own abilities, they actually bring immigrants to the New World. Several Polish, German craftsmen who will do glass blowing, metal work, and eventually, because they were not given the same rights as the other English settlers, they are going to go on strike and request that their rights be granted to vote in the local assembly, and they had the very first labor strike in the New World until their rights were granted. The difficulty of the situation became so dire that there is evidence of cannibalism taking place at the Jamestown colony, and 4 years after its original settlement in Jamestown, the government is going to move a few miles upriver and establish a new settlement nearby after Prince Henry and call it Henricus. This will be the actual spot where Pocahontas would be held captive for a year, and there is going to be another Englishman who will notice her there named John Rolfe, who arrives to the Virginia colony bearing the seeds of a plant from Mexico of tobacco. And this new product is going to be grown in the warm, humid climates of the Virginia colony. And it will be this very cash crop or agriculture product that ends up keeping the Jamestown thriving. It provides the financial resources to grow tobacco, to make the cigars and tools, to then sell it back to England as a business venture. And pretty quickly, large farms and agriculture plantations are going to develop and spring up in Virginia to produce this leafy gold. It was abhorrent to King James, who didn't like what it was doing to the English people, but many back in England and in the colonies are going to now be consumed to this new type of practice of smoking tobacco. In the need for laborers, there are going to be indentured servants brought over from Europe, as well as the very first arrival of African slaves to the English colonies. As the Spanish had brought African slaves to Florida nearly 60 years prior, in the year 1619, the first shipment of a boat brought over by the Portuguese will arrive at Jamestown, carrying African slave laborers to work on these Virginia plantations. There would be a continuation of Native American conflicts with the English following the death of Chief Powhatan, and in time, Jamestown itself will fall away, and a new colonial capital of Williamsburg will be built in the later 1600s. It will have its own government, establish a House of Burgesses where local officials are going to be elected by the people. There's going to be the founding of the College of William and Mary. And today, Jamestown and Williamsburg are colonial sites for many people still dress like it's the 1700s. You have the craftsmaking shops and metalworks. People like Queen Elizabeth II has gone on 2 visits to the site. Many different tourists end up going and enjoying the various attractions, and the original fort itself is available for tourists to walk and see this place that is continuously being excavated even as rising seawaters threaten the very first English settlement in the New World. And every year, a continuation of artifacts and items are being discovered. Americans a better perspective of what life was like for those very first Englishmen who arrived seeking wealth and profit, barely made it out, but through the works and use of such products as tobacco, the colony will thrive and continue on to preserve and establish an English foothold in the New World, and it will lead to other adventures that we'll look at next time, including the arrival of another group of Englishmen known as the Pilgrims at a place called Plymouth.